I think modern HEMA tournaments and fighting in earnest don't necessarily have to be the polar opposites they're often made out to be. And after watching this video, you're either all going to agree with me or want to kick my ass. And I can't wait to find out which one of the two that is. Hello there, it's Oskar at the Virtual Fechtschule. And today I'm going to be tackling a rather sticky subject. Tournaments, sportification and its relation to medieval and early modern fight books. I'm not going to pretend that I'm the first one to say anything sensible about this, and I also am under no illusion that me being a super low tier YouTuber has any chance of putting this debate to bed. But recently I've just seen a lot of really bad takes on this subject, and I need to get this off my chest and hopefully also provide something positive to the discussion about where we want to go with HEMA. Some of you might already be on a first name basis with this particular brand of HEMA drama. Eyes staring off into the distance as memories of that one swordfish where HEMA died flash in front of their eyes. Well, others might have a more healthier relationship with online HEMA, meaning that they're not in Facebook groups anymore, or are just new altogether and are wondering what the fuss is all about. So, since this is a subject that is about the direction where HEMA wants to go, I figured it would be a fun one to talk about. Before I explain further, it will probably be a good idea to talk about why this is so controversial in the first place. And for that, I'm going to be using something that I like to call the tournament loop. And it goes like this. A tournament happens, and then someone has the audacity to go and win it by such dastardly means as athleticism and a good grasp on general fencing fundamentals. This will make some people really upset, who then write blog posts or make salty YouTube videos about how the art has finally died. They will invariably be met by comments along the lines of "get good," often exalting the superiority of modern Olympic fencing over reading fight books. Someone also always comes along to try and unify both these perspectives, doing it in such a reasonable way and backed up by a lot of experience, so that everyone else can either agree or look stupid. So, after all that dies down, what follows is several weeks of other drama, with the words real fighting, the art, and naked sharps only occasionally getting memed, until a high-profile tournament takes place and the circle begins again. Before I go and state my opinion on all this, and hopefully provide some compelling arguments to show that I'm not actually talking out of my arse here, I should also probably say that I don't really have a horse in this race. True, I'm mostly known as a fencer who's somewhat knowledgeable about fight books, but at the same time I join a lot of tournaments, I enjoy them a lot, and generally also don't do too badly in them. And I think they play a very important role in becoming the complete martial artist that I aspire to be. I suppose that next to just having fun with swords, for me the most important reason to do this HEMA thing is the desire to understand the fight books and the physical culture of the past at large. But at the same time, I also feel that modern resources have a lot to offer as well. And of course, I want to be able to put my interpretations of fight books to the test at speed and under pressure, for which tournaments are ideal. Understanding fencing is some sort of never-ending hermeneutic circle by which you use the input gotten from sparring, tournaments, reading sources, teaching, being taught, etc. to refine your interpretations and just get better in general. Now, down to business. An argument I see all the time is that the so-called real fighting from the fight books doesn't quite well work in tournaments. And by extension, of course, this means that tournaments must be bad. And even though terms as real fighting are problematic in more ways than I can cover in a single video, in fairness I will have to say that tournaments can indeed sometimes be a bit problematic. Tournament rule sets can introduce artifacts, for instance, rewarding some types of fencing and punishing others. Everyone has their favorite rule sets, but none of them that I encountered are without their issues. Weighted scoring will generally mean that people will be pushed to go for the head a lot more than might be a good idea, and at the same time rule sets without an afterblow will encourage overly committed attacks. And in both of these cases there are also some associated safety risks to this. But I did end up wondering about the truth of the assertion that real fighting doesn't work in fight books. Previously I kind of always just assumed it to be the case, because after all, some techniques from fight books work really well in a tournament, but the vast majority of them doesn't really work that well. It's not really part of a viable competitive strategy. But at the same time, I just started wondering, like, what is this real fighting if we start looking at fight books, and would these techniques then be as unviable as we assume them to be? So let's go and find out. The closest thing to real fighting that we get in the fight books is what's called Ernstfechten, Ernstentlich Fechten, or something worded in a very similar manner. And this refers to the context where there's absolutely no restraint on the amount of force that you may use. This has no place in the Fechtschule, of course, because that's just a friendly competitive bout. And similarly, it also has no place in an honorable duel that you would sometimes see being fought in the streets. Because in a medieval city, anyone who would maim or kill another person would come under very close scrutiny by the authorities. And therefore, you would only use lethal force if you could very clearly demonstrate that the other person meant you very serious harm, and that lethal force was the only way to stop them. Of course, I dived into Lecküchner, and I tried to find all the Stücke that mention the word Ernst or Ernstlich. And I came up with 4 groups of technique that do. And I'll try to explain to you why these are very suitable for earnest fights. De Plieren and the Wecker against the peasant strike mention that these can be used to avenge yourself when the opponent tries to hit you in earnest. This makes sense from a trauma point of view. De Plieren is difficult to control, and when it hits, it has the potential to demolish the jaw joint, cut the artery, or do both. The Wecker is followed up with a cut to the neck with very similar results. They also both require the opponent to really commit with a hard strike. In the case of De Plieren, this helps to set up the hard bind required to do it. For the Wecker, it's needed to make sure that you can properly deflect the opponent's cut by beating their messer away to the side. The other 2 are Ansetzen and the Lehmstücke. When it comes to trauma, Ansetzen is obviously an earnest technique, because you're thrusting into your opponent's preparation to cut. This is hard to control, and thrusts are generally speaking more lethal in the first place. The Lehmstücke, or maiming pieces, target the hand in the earnest variation. This may not kill an assailant outright, but will effectively put them out of the fight. And added to that, a ruined hand was considered a grievous injury though, since it would effectively take away someone's livelihood, whatever their craft or profession may have been. A Lehmstück was not to be used lightly. These latter 2 techniques are also tactically very useful in an earnest fight, because they're suited to being done with eyes closed. Check this video up here for a more in-depth explanation of the concept, by the way. In order for these to work, the opponent just needs to fulfill a certain condition. That is, moving forward without attacking for Ansetzen, and moving the hand forward in any way for the Lehmstück. As soon as this condition is met, you perform the corresponding technique. This means that you don't have to make any decisions about what to do, meaning that you can do these techniques faster. For Ansetzen, the fact that they don't attack you keeps you safe, whereas the fact that with a Lehmstück you step backwards or sideways away from the attack enables you to land an attack to a shallow target, while the opponent is attacking a deep target that is no longer there. But what does this have to do with tournaments? Well, looking at the list of techniques that Lecküchner thinks are very suitable for Ernstfechten, I had a very mild sense of déjà vu, because a lot of these very techniques also tend to happen quite a lot in competitive fencing already. And that's not strange, because the things that make them successful in an earnest fight make them also very useful in a tournament fight. Think about it. All of these techniques will generally result in severe trauma at very little risk to yourself. And fencers in the 15th century will very rarely have used them, if at all. After all, you don't just brush off a murder charge, and you want to keep your sparring partners in one piece. You don't really have to worry all that much about these things in a modern tournament though. True, restraint is still considered a virtue and often a must, and I think that's a good thing. But at the same time, a cut to the side of the mask, a thrust to the fencing jacket, or a sweep to the heavy glove can be done in relative safety. So the biggest historical reason to not use these techniques is now gone, but at the same time their advantages still very much apply. That said, I did think it was a good idea to try and put this theory to the test. And in order to do that, over the last 2 months or so, I fought a number of bouts with sparring partners that were either relatively new to me or new in general. By trying this with people that I don't regularly train with, I hope to avoid the experiment being influenced by the fact that they already know well to try and contest control of the center line before committing to trying and scoring a hit. After all, in a tournament, you mostly fence opponents you don't regularly train with either. With these sparring partners, I would first, for about 5 to 10 exchanges, try to fence as I normally would, trying to control the center and making use of the entirety of Lecküchner's Stück, as they appeared suitable at the time. After that, I would fence another 5 to 10 exchanges, but now only using the techniques meant for earnest fighting. After the bout, I would then compare the number of clean hits I managed to score with both approaches. And this is what I learned. First off, against uncooperative opponents, the Ernstfechten techniques clearly led to more clean hits, with generally 4 to 5 hits being clean versus anything between 0 and 3 clean hits when trying to apply all of Lecküchner's art. The only clear exception was a bout with a partner who, against my expectations, did really well to strive to work in the bind and control the center line. At that point, the clean hit ratio was the same across both approaches. I'll have to admit that the Duplieren and the Wecker worked only rarely, since the partners I fenced with didn't necessarily commit to their strikes all that much, meaning that the situations in which these techniques work didn't occur all that often. It does seem, though, that for me, the other Ernstfechten techniques are not just viable in competitive fencing, but offer a lot of advantages as well. So, what does it tell us? Unfortunately, not a great deal. After all, I'm just a guy on the internet who read like 3 books and does some sparring experiments from time to time. But there's an interesting follow-up question to all this, and I think I already have a hypothesis for it as well. Should we just throw all fight books in the bin? Of course not. First off, just cutting in hands and trying to get an occasional thrusting gets old really fast. And also, there's a lot of Stücke from Lecküchner that are not necessarily described as being suitable for Ernstfechten, but will work very well in a tournament. Absetzen is a very nice example, as I covered in my previous video. And then, even if the majority of the Stücke from fight books would turn out to be not as viable in a competition, that doesn't mean that they never worked as intended in their original context. After all, a measured, restrained and controlled show of supremacy in fencing would generally achieve all of your goals. At the Fechtschule, the audience would be in awe of your skill and dexterity, or laughing their ass off if you whip out the bag or pull something like this. When disarming your drunk and belligerent neighbor, you would avoid having to live next door to an understandably upset widow. And since nobody got hurt, the authorities can remain uninvolved. And when facing off against a rival from the other part of town who insulted you in front of your friends, family and neighbors, 2 quick thrusts to both cheeks will quickly show that person that you're not to be messed further with. Learning to fence with control as the main goal was a viable way to practice fencing in the 15th century. And I think this approach has some merit for modern HEMA as well. After all, it will teach you more about fight books in their context. And generally, being able to control yourself will make you a much more pleasant partner to spar with. And finally, of course, it's just fun. And isn't that the most important reason why we all do this? So, a long one this time, but I hope I pled my case well and made sense. Let me know in the comments whether you agree or disagree, and of course, as per usual, questions are more than welcome. Now, if you like where this channel is going and you'd like to support me further, you can of course always like, subscribe and share the video, because those things will really help me beat the algorithm. And of course, I get a lot of tangible support from my patrons over at Patreon. They get early access to videos, tutorials, and of course a look behind the scenes. So if that seems worthwhile, why don't you check it out? Anyway, I've made a habit of using the most silly Dutch way to say goodbye to end my videos, and I'm not going to break the habit. So I'll say, okay doei, until the next one.